Oh, the medal's here. And we are live. Hi, everyone. Number one Marmaduke fan here. And today I am joined by the creator of Probl-O-Matic, formerly known as Bite Size, George Alexopoulos. Say hi to everyone.
Hey guys, thanks for coming.
So this is to celebrate a ongoing Indiegogo campaign to publish like the full history of Probl-O-Matic as a paperback book. And I've linked to the Indiegogo in the description. George, I've had a chance to read a lot of Probl-O-Matic this week, and I've really enjoyed the webcomic. I'd like people to hear from you, though. But basically, what kind of work? How long have you been working as a webcomic artist?
Well, webcomics specifically, I would say strips, about 10 years. But I started with graphic novels, actually. I published my first graphic novel online in 2003.
Wow.
Yeah, so I've been doing it. I mean, I've been drawing comics since forever, right? High school, middle school, and all that. And then I got my website going when I was a teen. And yeah, I've just, if it's either on the web or at the lunch table, I've always been drawing comics to show to people. And that's basically what I do now.
And just my impressions on Probl-O-Matic. So originally it was called Bite Size. I was just kind of curious. I mean, the main character, Greg Alexander, he's kind of short. Is there any other significance to the original name Bite Size apart from that?
No, that was, well, when I started the strip, it was supposed to be a sort of exercise for me, just to keep fresh while I was at my other job. So I put myself as the main character. And the joke was that in middle school, I had a friend who called me Fun Size. So that's why I called it Bite Size. But then Greg became his own character after a while.
So I have some thoughts on that since I got to read. Like, it starts as kind of like a typical, like Gag-A-Day strip about, kind of like a bit of an antisocial artist, right? Like he says socially awkward things, and he's feeling kind of bad about being single. And then over time, other characters start making their way into the world, and you've had like significant following, following the strip, liking this strip, which is something that crops up a lot. Is you're getting numbers that are similar to some of like the top comics online webtoons, but I'd never heard of you until just recently when I started reading the comic.
Yeah.
So for some of the other characters, let me just kind of like, for people who haven't read your comic before, let me kind of give some of my thoughts on it as like a fresh reader. So Duncan is a coworker of Greg's, and he's kind of like, it's perfect, comedy writing, because he's a foil. Like Duncan's a sort of a brutal optimist. Greg is a lot more pessimistic, and so they bounce off each other a bit. And one of the most interesting things about it that that really caught my interest is there's this girl Xavier, and then all of a sudden he calls her his imaginary friend, right? And so I spent a while thinking, oh, is he like talking to people in his head? But then other people will recognize that Xavier seems to be real. So you would have like your fans having this great back and forth about, gee, is she really imaginary? Is she a real person? Is there a canon answer to that, or is that an ongoing debate?
There is. I eventually caved because too many people were asking, and I didn't want them to focus on it. It was just a semantic. For anyone who doesn't know, two of the main characters call each other their imaginary friends.
Yeah.
And so at first I wanted to make it seem like she wasn't a real person. Greg was this pathetic, he just makes up his own friends because he doesn't have any in real life. And that was kind of the angle at first when I started writing her. But later I decided, no, because of her personality, they're imaginary friends in the literal sense. They don't actually, well, he likes her, but she doesn't like him. But their friendship itself is imaginary. It's really, when we talk about like the whole strip, like my favorite thing is the contrasting, what's the word? Like their characteristics, right? She's very aggressive and dry, and he's really soft, emotional, emo. Yeah. They would never be friends in real life, but for some reason, which someday I'd love to get into, I think I'm going to do it in the printed volume, explain how they became friends in the first place.
Oh, good.
For some reason, they hang out all the time. She seems to have a key to his house. She's always in his house. She has access to his bank account for some reason. They're like the closest friends, but for some reason, she can't stand him. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just think it's the subject for endless jokes.
Right. Well, it's a classic comedy relationship, but yes. It also gets at like some interesting ideas that you feature a lot of homages in your work. So like Calvin and Hobbes, Bone, Peanuts, Jane Austen, Sense and Sensibility, Osamu Tezuka's Blackjack. I kind of felt like a kindred spirit kind of thing going. With
I'm amazed that you got those. Yeah,
yeah, and plenty I hadn't heard of. Like I had never heard of like that one Shel Silverstein book, The Missing Piece. And so I had that kind of like mirror reaction, like, wow, I really missed a Shel Silverstein book. And then I went and found it. And then your comic got all so much funnier because then I saw how like the theme of that book informed the character of Greg himself. So not only are you like making allusions to written works, you're alluding to them in a way that it's smart humor. Like the comic's funny all by itself without knowing the reference. But if you know the reference, then it adds all of this like context to it because you have kind of literary characters. You have characters you enjoy reading.
Wow, that's a really nice compliment. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. You deserve it. Let me think. Let's bring up some of that. So I've read a lot of Osamu Tezuka, but I actually haven't read Blackjack. And I can tell that it influenced you. So how did that kind of carry over into your comic work?
Wow. I came to Tezuka late. So I had already started this series, but I got into a big manga history phase, I would say in my mid-20s. So I started going back into the history. And of course, he was being published. I don't remember the publisher here. Like at, say, Barnes & Noble, you would find his books. So you get your Blackjacks, which was my favorite of his. Astro Boy, I saw. Man, I could list off a bunch of his. It's been a while. Apollo's Song I liked a lot. But sorry, the question was, did he influence? I would say I loved his historical impact. Man, that's a really deep question. Did he influence my art? I think yes, actually, because I once read that he... Man, I'm trying to reference all these other books. I'm really sorry. I once read that he draws his characters' heads, then the hands and the feet, and then connects them, connects their limbs to the hands and the feet. So it's like these floating hands, like Rayman, if you imagine. Yeah. And I started doing that a couple of years ago, and I really like, even though the characters look like they're made of gum, their limbs are a little squishy and maybe not perfectly proportioned. Like I started borrowing techniques that I learned from him, and they used to call him the god of manga, and for good reason. And his pace was crazy. If anyone doesn't know, he used to be a doctor, and then he became a manga artist. He's amazing. I became a huge fan, and Blackjack was my favorite work of his, especially because of a couple. I like short stories. I don't really like manga that goes on forever. I like self-contained. So Blackjack is a recurring character in the series, but a lot of his stories are just one-offs, maybe 30 pages, 60 pages, something like that. And some of the stories, even though they were written 50 years ago, are incredibly poignant. Yeah. I just absorbed a lot of his books. Like Greg, the main character, I would used to go to the Barnes & Noble, get a coffee, and sit there all day reading manga because I couldn't afford it.
Right. Man, yeah. So I didn't know, like I picked up the name similarity, right, between you and Greg Alexander, but you're always hesitant to say, oh, that's got to be an authorial insert, because I know that, comic artists especially, we tend to like take aspects of our personality and exaggerate those for comedic effect. But I did get a feel throughout the strip that there is a lot of you in this, but also between your characters. So like you had that one where Greg's kind of like going on a nerdy rant against Naruto. And then while he's going on that nerdy rant, Xavier's just sitting there reading it and clearly digging it.
Yeah. It's, I think it was Charles Schultz talked about how he puts, if you read his entire series, if you combined all the characters, you would get to know his character as a person. So I give each of the characters a little piece of me, let's say. So Greg is very emo. Xavier's kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Acerbic. She's raw. Duncan's, romantic, and Francine's kind of this neurotic, jealous. So I try to give all these, and now I have a new character, Astrid, who's Xavier's younger sister, who's this naive, sweet, the whole world's gonna kind of try to ruin her, but she's so like innocent and all that stuff. And every character represents different parts of, let's say, there isn't a lot of crossover in their personalities because I want to see what happens when they clash.
Yeah.
What happens when I put these two together or these three together?
And for some of them, like I remember there was this whole little like mini story about Francine being mad at Duncan because he said he would stay on the Titanic so she could live, right? And then you explain the comments that it starts as a gag, and then that just starts expanding into like a continuous series of strips where they're writing themselves. It's if you can just imagine these characters bouncing off of each other, that's where the creative idea starts taking over and taking on a life of its own.
Yeah, I've always felt that the best writing, it's as if you create a scenario and then the characters write themselves. So I'll only plan a couple of strips and usually that's it. But sometimes I'll be sitting there typing the script. I always do a script first before I draw. And then the idea just keeps going further and further. And then next thing I know, Francine is training to get into a boxing match with her former fiance. And everybody's fighting each other, and it's just so, it seems to write itself. But as long as it's funny and entertaining and it seems real, I say let the script determine the length. I never say it's going to be this long.
You also have done a few experiments of breaking out of like the 4-panel format. So you'll do Sunday. It's just like a good old, classic newspaper strip where you've got your 4-panel gags, and then you would frequently do kind of Sunday strip style gags where you'd expand the format. And once in a while, you would do like this really long epic adventure. I'm thinking of, I think it was episode maybe 200 or 300. It was Legend of Xavier. And,
yeah,
and I just couldn't believe it because at first I thought, okay, this is going to be a gag about how she had this like really crazy experience. And I just kept expecting her to say like, you really believe that's what happened, Greg? But then it just keeps going and it keeps going, and then the adventure keeps getting bigger and bigger. So you essentially stretch the Sunday format. It's sort of like how like Bill Watterson, when he would do Sunday strips, he would just completely play with the format of a Sunday strip. Yeah. You kind of played with the format of the webtoon strip, and you just kept stretching it down and down and down. And the adventure keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Tell me a bit about that one. Did that come after like a bit of a hiatus for you from the comic?
Oh, that's man. Your questions are amazing, dude. Well, Watterson, of course, he wanted the whole front page to himself, and he could have saved comics, but that's another subject, I guess. But if he had the power of webcomics at his hands, I think he would have done something like this, probably. I'm definitely not comparing myself to him, but I drew that because it was I was publishing one volume of the series every 200 strips. So I wanted to have a little end cap at the end of the volume as a special short story, maybe fleshing out the character of Xavier. And she goes on this, she used to be a heavy metal rock singer, and maybe this is true, maybe it's not true. I actually think it is canonically true. But it's so ridiculous because it's like she goes and fights this evil entity called Darkness, if anyone's played Kingdom Hearts, and she has to go save the Earth Crystal. What is all this nonsense? But I thought it would be the funniest thing. Like, I have this joke in my head. Superheroes and all this stuff exist in the world of Probl-O-Matic, and Greg is the only character who's not special. He's just this little normal character, and everyone else is living this amazing life. But he can't seem to get it together. I think that's so dumb and funny. But I like the tall tale aspect of it.
So let me say something that I was thinking about while reading is I've seen a lot of webcomics where the gag is kind of, haha, I'm neurotic. But what's interesting about the format you're using is because you're willing to play with the format, you go beyond that in a lot of strips. Like there are a lot of gags where, Greg's the butt of the joke, and it's because he's so antisocial, he's so neurotic. But then you stretch that by using the other characters and using these other formats. So I just want to kind of like give you props for like maybe breaking out of the rut of maybe just like staying in the safe zone of always having like, I'm so depressed comics. You have a variety of comics. You have gags about depression. You have gags about romance. You have gags about pop culture and daydreaming, like genuine artistic advice. I appreciate an artist and a webcomic artist bringing kind of like more than just one slice of life into their comic work.
That's really nice of you to say. I think part of it is that, and why I wanted to get away from this character represents me. They need to be their own characters because I don't think there needs to be a good guy or a main character. As far as I know, they're all the main character. it's not just Greg, just because he's, you know, the stand-in at the beginning. So I don't necessarily say he's right. A lot of the time he might even be wrong, but I just think the situations lend themselves to good writing that, and let's say earnest writing. He might do things and say things that I don't agree with, but that it still feels really natural for him as a character. Like, for instance, I used to be really religious, but I'm not now. But Greg is. So I think it's important for him to stay religious, even though a lot of people complained about there was, oh, you're pushing religious content. And I'm like, dude, I haven't believed this stuff in 10 years. But it's still really important for him to stay earnest. And it's not like I'm trying to push religion like I used to be into that, but like I still think it's important to write the characters as if they're real people and see, maybe he's right sometimes, maybe he's wrong sometimes, but it's like a friend, right? You don't agree with everything your friend says, but now, you still love them.
Now I noticed the tendency to like directly bring in religious topics and religious comments into the comic. So were you practicing that while you were making the comic itself, or had you already moved past that?
I would have to look at the exact dates and exact strips, but I would say in my mid-20s, early mid-20s, I was very into Protestant Christianity. And so there was a lot of emphasis on evangelism, if anyone's familiar with that. So, you know, just telling people about Jesus and all that good stuff. And at that time, that was on my mind. That was in my heart, you know, let's say. And so I thought there was, some of the jokes are, for instance, that Greg wants to tell people about Jesus, but he's cripplingly shy. And that's humor. So I'm not necessarily trying to push the Jesus agenda, but what kind of jokes can I tell through this lens? And as I got older, and I just became more agnostic, nothing dramatic or anything like that. But I still felt like I've sometimes thought, like, should I take that stuff out of the series? And then this voice tells me, no, of course not. It's, how many comics even touch this stuff? Like, it's not right for me to censor what is a sincere storyline for a sincere character. It's not like he has any bad intentions. He's just speaking from his heart. Yeah. I'm sorry, did that answer the question?
You got me. Well, because when I was reading it, I was reading it as a completely sincere statement. Now, I didn't automatically assume this must represent what you think, but I did think that was actually kind of like a representation of you trying to talk about your own religious feelings in the context of the comic, even if you were kind of like bringing it into the context of a narrative. So you are an agnostic now. That's how you identify?
I would say so, yeah. So, but my upbringing is very much Protestant.
Okay. So just so you know, I'm still in the faith that I was brought up to be in. So, okay. I don't know. So you were really speaking to me in those comics I was reading. I'm glad. Okay. Has your upbringing in religion affected your thoughts on writing in other ways? Because I know a lot of people, when they look at like C.S. Lewis or J.R.R. Tolkien, they also look at them as, like, you were probably familiar with this growing up in Protestant circles, but they're not just looked at as writers, but they're also looked at as kind of representatives of like what a religious person can strive to be in the culture, because they were kind of bringing their faith into the context of stories that resonate with millions and millions of people. Is that something like, am I describing something from your background, or does that kind of click with you at all?
I would say, well, there's that famous quote, you speak out of the wellspring of your heart, right? Anytime you sit down to write, you're just basically, if it's not manufactured writing, you're just speaking from the heart. You're trying to find truth in the characters and the dialogue and the stories themselves. So eventually you could call it memes, like in the sense of like genetics for thoughts and ideas. Your memes are going to eventually go out into your writing, and they're just like going to spread, and they're going to become part of your morals. Let's say if a story has a moral, then eventually maybe you don't even know what your morals are, and you're exploring. Like, everybody loves who's that Russian writer?
The
brothers
Karamazov, Dostoevsky.
Yes, him and Tolstoy. Everybody likes them because it's like his dialogue is an argument with himself. And he's just exploring thoughts and ideas, and maybe he's not trying to push a narrative, but he has these thoughts, and he just, as he's writing, he creates these characters to sort of explore his own feelings. So in my own writing, let's say I have a certain beginning and an end, but I don't know what the route's going to be. And I just say, well, if I'm going to aim for that goal, if I'm going to take a drive from New Jersey to LA, I know that I want to be in LA, and I'm just going to drive. And that's what writing's like. And maybe you don't even end up in LA at the end, but you're going to embark on this amazing journey and meet all these interesting characters. I'm talking about writing, not driving. I'm sorry. But that's what writing is a lot of the time. Maybe you have points along the way. Oh, I want to hit the Grand Canyon on the way. I want to visit, Nashville on the way. But that's what writing is. You just have a sort of a goal. This is kind of where I want to go. I'm going to hit these points maybe, and we're just going to see where we end up.
You can't exert a kind of like OCD control over that process.
You can, but I don't know. Every writer has a different style, I suppose. I don't think that kind of writing is fun. Like a lot of criticisms, I won't get into it if you don't want, but like a lot of the criticisms of Comicsgate and all that kind of thing, or not.
You can get into whatever you want to. This is a free speech zone.
Well, a lot of the Comicsgate people dislike Marvel and DC. I think recently, I don't read a lot of superhero comics, but the criticism is that the stories seem manufactured, like almost propagandistic. And I think readers can detect when writers are trying to shove a moral down the throats of the audience. We're really, like, we talk about artistic mediums. The word medium is like a bridge, right? It's between me, the creator, and you, the audience. And we're having a dialogue. It's like a ping pong game. I'm using the medium of comics to communicate ideas, and you're putting your ideas into the book as well. So we're having this communication. It's supposed to be a dialogue. Instead of me just preaching this idea, I'm putting this allegory together of, superheroes, and here's the moral that I demand you consume. Whereas I think a really well-told story is just, this is the story, and you are free to inject your own interpretations. That's why people like novels. It's like, well, what does this character look like? What does this room look like? Everybody has a different way of, a different interpretation of what that room looks like. But also, there's this sort of back and forth. What does the story mean to you? That doesn't necessarily, I don't agree with the postmodern thing of like, you can overwrite the intent of the author. But I think there's this back and forth that's really, really beautiful in storytelling.
So maybe to connect that with another reference you make in the series, like Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility comes up in a lot of gag strips. So it's kind of to connect what you said to Sense and Sensibility. Sense and Sensibility has this kind of like underlying kind of Victorian Christian moral aspect to it, but you can't just reduce it to that, because the characters are such primal ideas that they transcend that time period and speak to a contemporary audience.
Yeah. I mean, nobody can read that and say it's really an allegory about war or something, even though I've always found it interesting that a lot of Jane Austen's books were taking place during like the Indian and Chinese wars and stuff. That's why all the men were gone from those books. But they are about a certain thing, and if you can relate to it and find I don't know, a camaraderie with the main characters, like I would read it and say, oh man, I wish I knew these people. I wish I knew Eleanor and her sister Marianne. I watched the movies, I read the books, and they're just beautiful portals into different worlds that you'll never meet these people, but you get to witness their lives. It's really fun.
Did you read the manga adaptation of Sense and Sensibility, by the way? I
did not.
All right. I saw like some illustrations that you did of like 18th century ladies. So I was kind of wondering. So dang it, I found a reference that you haven't caught. But apart from that, like this is a really, not just for me, but I think for anyone who spent a lot of time reading comics, you work in references to comics in such a way that you don't just like hit us over the head and say, hey, here's a thing that's in the popular culture. Haha, I referenced the thing. But I think it would speak to a lot of people who are just into comics, right? Like that's clearly you. It clearly shows up in just how many comics you've made for this series, like over 500 comics. And I think that anybody who, it also crosses like different boundaries. Like, yeah, manga. I think you'd speak to a lot of people who read manga. I think you'd speak to people who read Scott Pilgrim. I think you'd speak to people who read Western comics, even if superhero comics aren't your biggest thing. There's so much love for the history of comics in your work.
I would say so. Storytelling is really the thing that I love. So it could take any form: movies, games, comics. And I always say, like, in order to create something, it's like fuel. You need fuel for your car. So if you don't consume good stories, then you can't produce good stories. I've always thought so.
Yeah. All right. So here's one. Here's one I've been thinking about. Do you read them and then just absorb them and then move on, or do you come back and reread them and reread them with a critical eye? Do you do a bit of both when you're reading?
I do both. The best stories, the ones that I think have the most juice, those are the ones I go back and reread over and over.
Yeah.
And I think maybe it's just a subconscious thing, but the stories that we come back to, like, for instance, when I was in high school, I saw this movie, First Blood, Rambo Part 1, over 200 times. And it was my favorite movie of all time at that time. And what I realized later, the reason I was watching that movie so much was because I was being bullied. And I saw that movie as an empowerment story. And I needed to keep watching that movie until I understood that, no, I don't have to be bullied. But even though, like, the police in the movie were the bad guys.
Yeah.
So even if the supposed good guys are being mean to you, that doesn't mean you have to take it.
Yeah.
But, like, what I'm trying to say is, if you keep going back to a story over and over, there must be something it's telling you that you're trying to resolve in your mind. Some lesson that you're trying to take from it. Maybe it's even technical. Like, there are movies like M. Night Shyamalan's first 4 movies, especially Unbreakable, Split just came out, or Glass. I think Unbreakable 1 is a masterpiece, and I've seen that dozens of times. And just from a craft perspective, I needed to keep watching it. Like, why is this movie so good? I just kept watching it over and over. And I think eventually by osmosis, you just absorb the good storytelling techniques. And by contrast, I think bad movies are to be analyzed and resisted and criticized. Like, why? Not just, I didn't like it. You have to say why you didn't like it and analyze that.
Okay, so I've noticed break out of the 4-panel comic format a lot, but you generally keep to that format for Probl-O-Matic. You've also written some stories. Do you envision other kinds of writing, like screenplay writing, like theatrical writing?
Yes. What I always start with is just, I have a way of writing that's sort of like a screenplay. And it can be converted into any number of mediums. So the way that I write all of my strips is the same way I write my graphic novels, let's say, or my screenplays. And I just let the story determine, like, who am I to say? Like, I can't make a movie myself, or at least not right now, but I let the story determine, like, oh, what would the best medium be? So I'll write a whole script, 300 pages, let's say, and I'll say, well, this should probably be a graphic novel. But then I have to ask myself some serious questions, because now I'm 33 and, on and off doing comic stuff. Do I have time to actually turn this into a series of graphic novels?
Yeah.
So I have all these scripts, maybe a dozen of them, that are really, really long stories that are ready to be made, drawn, but I just don't have the time to do it. So I've been asking myself these questions lately. Should I just publish the scripts with illustrations? Because even if they never get turned into movies or video games, let's say, I still want, even if it's a small group of people, I still think the stories are great and I want to share them. So that's actually something I've been struggling with a lot. But the script is the backbone of a good story.
Have you ever considered working in a collaborative form with like another artist?
Yes, but for some reason, I have trouble working with people sometimes.
Very Greg-like.
I don't know how to put it. Yeah, I've worked with other people, like, on games before, because I don't know how to code. So I've worked with coders. But it's hard because I work at different paces than other people, so maybe I need breaks, or maybe I'm really hot and then they have other things to do. So a lot of these projects are just being done without any money being exchanged, right?
Yeah.
And if people are just doing it in their free time, it's like, well, do you have time to code? If not, you know, I have a whole script. That's what we talked about earlier, the piggyback acorn script.
Yeah.
That was a game. And I was working with a coder, and I was working on the script so slowly that he eventually had to leave the project. And he told me, do whatever you want with the script. So I have tried working with people, but I think unless I can pay them to do the work, I'm kind of stuck in this purgatory.
Yeah. So this is where like even just like minor self-publishing could at least help get some of this information out there, because like comics take a long time to make, but at least they can be made by one person. Like I can't even imagine like the complexities of doing the art and the programming for a video game, and obviously you need a studio to make movies and things. So
Yeah.
you're a person who is producing a lot of content. You're producing a lot of comics. You're producing a lot of scripts, and you're still an independent artist, kind of like bringing forth all this stuff. And I don't know. I think it is a good idea to sometimes put it out there, just so it maybe like has the option to, like, that's what J.K. Rowling did before she was a multimillionaire billionaire. She would self-publish her books and like try to sell them at little like conventions in London or something.
Is that so?
Yes. There are first editions of the first Harry Potter book prior to Scholastic picking it up. You know, that's the beauty of art, is you can have this rags to riches story, but you know, because the arts are something that are purely for pleasure, purely for entertainment, and like, you know, like, I'm not putting them down. Like it provides so much meaning to people, but the competitiveness of it is massive.
Yeah, I joke with myself, everyone knows how to type, but not everyone knows how to write.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of saturation out there. And how can any reader discern what's just a really great story, a diamond in the rough, or how can they tell what's basically 50 Shades of Grey fan fiction, you know? But that made millions of dollars, so who am I to say?
Right.
But why not let the internet be, you know, the place where everybody decides what's great and what's not. Less middlemen, the better. Sometimes maybe middlemen are good because they can curate, like editors and publishers. What they should do is find the best stories and make them even better and make them easy to find. But because they take so much overhead, it's almost like they live off the blood of how am I trying to put this without putting them down? The nature of their work depends on creators thriving.
Yeah.
If without creators, then they don't have jobs. And it seems that they're making more money than creators now. And that's not great.
What are your thoughts on, you've used the YouTube platform a little bit. I haven't checked out your channel. How much have you used it, and what's your thoughts on the effect that can have on the arts industry?
I think, well, Jordan Peterson's talked about it like it's the new printing press.
Yeah.
It's an unbelievably huge revolution. The only downside to it is that it's also curated, which worries me, but that doesn't mean other competitors can't come up.
Yeah.
As a tool, I think YouTube's incredible. It's like let's say we're having a phone conversation, and as many people as they want, they can come and listen. It's such an incredible way to just connect person to person. So as a creator, that's what you want. You want an audience who can, on demand, just consume as much or as little of your content as possible. Mm-hmm. I wish I had more time for YouTube. I don't know. I feel like I have to decide on a few, like I have to put down certain projects in order to pick up other ones.
Yeah. So
I know YouTube's really powerful. And I have, you know, the tools, like I know how to edit, I know how to animate, I know how to do all kinds of stuff, but time is the problem.
It can be a devil's bargain, because like that could be a successful thing. You could use your animation and your art talents in that field, but what do you do when there are competing fields for your time? Huh?
Yeah, like an amazing dream that'll never happen is, I'm sure you've heard of Hayao Miyazaki.
Yeah.
I think he's like, let's say if Tezuka was the god of animation, then he's the second coming. Like
Right.
or no, the god of comics. I
Right,
think,
right. Because
yeah, Miyazaki
Tetsuka,
is the god of animation.
Tetsuka used to dip his toe. I think that Miyazaki once put down Tetsuka. Like he thought he was a brilliant comic artist, but he didn't like any of Tetsuka's animation.
Yeah. Well, he would. He seems to have a lot of strong things to say. I've read some of his books,
Yeah.
Starting Point and Turning Point.
Oh wow.
But, Miyazaki I don't know, like I can't like look directly at him. He's too incredible, and I've wanted to learn animation to be like him, but you need like making animation of that quality takes a huge team and a huge budget. You just can't do it. Like if I wanted, I could, let's say theoretically, I know how to animate by hand traditionally. I could do something like that. Like I can make a 5-minute short. It would take me 6 months.
Yeah.
Full time.
Yeah,
like,
that's the problem.
What's the point?
And YouTube is kind of like making that more and more difficult because YouTube prioritizes quantity over quality, it seems.
That's true. Yeah, a 5-minute animation. Some people with, I mean, there have been great animations. Like there was a really famous Disney one where a black and white, some guy meets a girl because of a drifting piece of paper or something. It went viral. Yeah. It's beautiful, and you might get a job at Pixar, but then nobody at Pixar cares about your voice. They just want to make crappy movies.
Oh, you're not a Pixar fan. Okay, I didn't pick that up.
No. I am such a Pixar fan that I can't stand current Pixar.
All right. Okay, that makes sense. Where do you think they started to go wrong? Like Cars 2 or somewhere else?
There is a book called Creativity Incorporated. Who's the guy? Not John Lasseter. He was the other guy that Ed something maybe. They talked about before Pixar sold. Pixar was working with Disney, but they were not owned by Disney. They were actually owned by Steve Jobs, Pixar. And then they got sold to Disney around, what was before? Maybe Toy Story 3-ish?
I thought it was Monsters Incorporated or it was Finding Nemo, because Finding Nemo was a smash. And then everybody was talking about, well, is Pixar going to leave Disney now?
Okay. But then Disney bought them out and then kind of dissolved them. Then they did Tangled and all that stuff. They brought on a lot of the best talent from Pixar into Disney animation, which used to be the 2D stuff. So then Pixar, a lot of the younger people became the heads of Pixar, or at least the creative leads. And then you ended up with movies like Brave. And I don't want to talk too much because I mean, I know there are fans of Pixar, current Pixar. I don't want to be mean to them, but I think they lost. Disney seems to do a thing where there's something is missing when they get bought out. These companies, something happens to them. I can't put my finger on it. Something magical was lost with Pixar around Toy Story 3, maybe before it, and they were incredible. But then something happened. Disney happened. I don't know.
I mean, I've noticed like some of the sheen has gone off of Pixar since like sequelitis. It seems to have kicked in, right? Yeah. But I didn't mind Brave, and maybe I need to like go back at that one and look at it more critically. I know that Brave is one of the more controversial ones because it feels like they were just kind of like aping like the Disney princess format. But I think it's such a good example of balancing, character archetypes. Like it would have been so easy for the whole movie to be, I don't want to get married, I'm going to decide my own destiny. But then it changes halfway through to like this relationship between a mother and a daughter. I don't know. Maybe you and I should have like movie debates sometime or something.
I would adore that.
Yeah.
And you sound really well read, so I think that would be a very thrilling conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Let's pencil this down. Yeah. We'll pick some movies to debate. All right. Well, I don't know. Since we're having so many like weird, like similar interesting things. Did you ever read Kyoko Hikawa from Far Away while you were reading manga?
Far Away.
From Far Away. I think it's originally called Kanatakara. It's about a Japanese high school girl who gets like zapped into a fantasy world. No. Not ringing a bell?
No.
Shoot. Am I like one of two people on the internet who's heard about this? All right. Sorry, my bad. Because so much of what you were saying about like books that inspired you clicked with that one for me. I just wondered. All right. Well, we can't be like 10 for 10 on being nerds over the same
I'm going to look it up. I assure you.
All right. And then check out my video where I'm going to be like a complete geek over every little detail of it. It's tragic. Okay, so here's the connection I'm making. Like you're a very thoughtful writer, and you are a very active writer, and it hits me a little bit when, like, well, I don't know the name of the comics. It's like your comic name here or something, and every single one of them is the punchline is "oh no," and I look at that and I think, okay, the first 3 were funny, and then after 90, it's kind of like having the exact same punchline loses pack, and then you've got like kind of Schultz style, or kind of a Charles Schultz approach to character development and character dynamics, right? So what I love about YouTube and Twitter is it gets me a chance to introduce to comics like yours, where you're writing at a level that is significant, and it's still like, you've had a lot of people following your comics. So I'm not putting that. I'm just saying you're writing at a level that I feel like a lot of people would be really interested to be introduced to your work. And so the connection I was making is, when you're reading comics, sometimes you find like some weird little manga no one's ever heard of that wasn't like, the #1 Shonen Jump or anything, but it's just so deep and it's so impactful to you.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the Metalhead, the comment, Stephen King said, if you don't have time to read, you don't have the means to write. And I think that people who read comics, they kind of get a chance to absorb the best of both worlds. They get a chance to absorb good writing, but they also get a chance to absorb good art.
Yeah, the internet, we talked about oversaturation. It's almost overwhelming, and I wish there were better ways to discern what's the diamonds in the rough, how to find them. So for me as a creator, I've always tried to find the platforms where the most people are. So that's how I ended up on Webtoon. Before that, I was just publishing on my website and nobody could find it. Yeah. So now I'm trying with Twitter seems to be working. YouTube seems to be working. It almost seems like the creators have to find where the audiences are most likely to be. Like in America, not a lot of women, more this past generation, women don't read as many comics as, like, let's say Japan. There's a lot of shoujo mangas over there.
Yeah.
So maybe it's 50-50 in terms of male versus female readers. But I know a lot of girl readers and lady readers like Probl-O-Matic and my other stuff as well. And I've said, it just in my head, like, how do I find not only the guys who like comics on the internet, because they're everywhere, right?
Yeah.
But how do I find those female readers that we know? Everyone knows that women would love comics, but they need comics that they want to read.
Yep.
If manga was a great experiment back in the early 2000s, like stuff like Karakano, Mars, there were these series that I loved as a teenage boy, young man, that were intended for girls. But I said, wow, these are comics about actual like romance and stuff. And I love Jane Austen and stuff. And I said, wow, they don't make American comics like these. Why? It was driving me crazy. So I know there's a market. I still know that there's a market, but for some reason we can't seem to get to these people. And meanwhile, Marvel and DC are doing this thing where, like, let's give women and young women superhero power fantasies. Yeah. And I don't want to sound sexist by saying this, but I don't think that's what they want to read. They want to read things like romance, comedy, slice of life. There's all these different genres. And I know they like things like, boys love manga. There was a lot of that in the early 2000s published in Barnes & Noble and stuff. But so be it. Let them read that too. But it's like you're trying to convert male-dominated genres into to a female audience that is not interested. And I want to talk to more lady readers. I know Comicsgate has a bunch of them.
Yeah.
What kind of comics do they want to read? Not just superhero stuff. Like, I love romance books. That's not a guy thing, but I love them.
Yeah.
I don't think everybody wants superhero power fantasies. And I think we're really screwing up in the comics industry by just focusing on power fantasies. There are so many, especially in manga, so many genres that are barely touched in America. We need to do more stories like that.
Or there are a lot of manga that have a power element to them, right? But I think that as an industry, I think that Japan might just be more in touch with their readers. And I think maybe because of postmodernism, maybe just because of I don't know, something in whatever the Western soup is. I think the West is starting to like divide its artists from its general public. So artists feel like their call is to lecture the people, and their call isn't to resonate with the people. Whereas in the manga industry, you snooze, you lose. You got to get you want to publish in Shonen Jump, you better make something that little boys love. You want to get published in Shoujo Beat, you better like crank up the romance. There's a real strong emphasis on pleasing people, I think, in the manga industry.
And those manga magazines are very much demographics focused. Mm-hmm. This magazine is just for young men ages 10 to 14.
Yeah.
There's Shonen Jump, Shonen Ultra. I used to memorize them all. And then there's seinen manga and shoujo manga, and they're all focused on this specific gender, age, professions. You know, there's manga about cooking and tasting food. Like, there are markets for these things, and people are hungry for them. But they know who their audience is supposed to be.
Yeah.
And to just think about all these demographics that aren't even being tapped. Like, Twilight was a smash success. Young adult fiction was a smash success for a couple of years. You got your Catching Fire. What was that series?
Oh, Mockingbird.
Mockingjay, and of course Harry Potter and all that stuff.
Right.
Young adult books for a little while were mirroring the success of manga in Japan, let's say. They knew what their demographic wanted, and they gave it to them. Because it's easy for an adult to read a children's book or a young person's book because we've all been young people. Yeah. But maybe a young person can't read an adult book and understand. So you're almost handicapping yourself by writing for the wrong audience. Like I say, superhero ladies comics. Where is that audience? It must be so small. I don't get it. Like, I know, I've always said this. I have stories where there are lady main characters who are really strong and smart and all that, you know, stereotypical stuff, but they are characters. Their most important characteristics are not that they are women.
Do you know Ben Hatke?
I do not.
Oh, he's a cartoonist. All right. I think you'd find a kindred spirit in him.
Ben Hatke?
Yeah.
I'll write it down.
Okay, Ben Hatke. The series is Zeta the Space Girl. He's got one that's got a boy main character, and he's been teasing that he's going to have a crossover with all. Like, I got so excited for it because I'm such a Ben Hatke nerd. But he writes characters. He doesn't like get neurotic over it. She must be a strong female character. She must have, you know, X number of girl power moments per scene. He just writes a good female character, and you become absorbed in her story, and you watch her grow, right? Like, I think that too many people overthink, like, you know, the gender politics issues. Like, they think, I don't know, how do I write a good female character? Just write a character.
It has to be right from your
soul. Yeah.
Yeah. If I think there's just a subconscious element to storytelling. If you feel like the writer is taking you for a ride and it's not your story anymore, there's just something that subconsciously feels artificial about it. I want non-GMO stories.
Genetically modified organism stories?
I don't want GMO stories. I want organic stories.
Yeah, there we go. And now I understand the metaphor.
Yeah. Don't give me that artificial stuff.
Okay, we went a little bit off of the line of Probl-O-Matic, and I want to kind of come back to that. All right, so you've got an Indiegogo campaign. You know, people need to support you. The link's in the description. You've mentioned bonus content, and I know you've written like short stories about these characters. Tell us a little bit about what we can expect in the book beyond just the collection of comics.
Let's see. Well, I'm still assembling the book. So it's going to be the first 500 or so strips that are all in black and white. Concept art, 2 short stories which have been published in the other collections. So one of them is called Legend of Xavier, which we talked about, and then the Living Water Crisis, which is a illustrated short story. And then I'm going to do one more story illustrating how the 2 main characters met as kids, which has not been explored in the series yet. As for other bonus content in the book, I think that might be it, but it is going to be 300 pages. So I assure you that's not going to disappoint anybody. That's it.
And people, you know, at different tiers can get different rewards. For example, they can get a hand-drawn sketch by you for, I think it's the $50 tier. And one of them was the 10 illustrated prints. And I noticed on that these come from the history of the series. Could you explain that a bit? Like, were these like just bonus drawings you did throughout the years?
Sometimes I would take let's see, some of my favorite ones where, for instance, there was one that did so well for no reason that I didn't plan it, but the punchline was, I wish I had someone to be alone with, because Greg was feeling lonely. And everybody seemed to like that one. So I decided I wanted to turn that into a t-shirt, you know, or a poster. And so I colorized it. And I thought, you know, I could take all of a bunch of my other favorite strips and turn them into, the poster would be, on the left side is just the raw ink drawing. And on the right side would be fully colored. I used to work at a print shop, so it'd be printed real nice and everything. And, you know, just nice sheets of paper where you can see what the raw comic looks like and then what the finished comic looks like in color. I just think that's really neat. It's something I would want. That's the only way I can gauge these special things.
Now, maybe as a selling point, you know, will these illustrated prints ever be available again? Are they like completely unique to the prints, or will they also be included in the book?
Not in the book. The book's going to be black and white, but let's see. I don't see any reason not. I don't know enough about Indiegogo, but if it's exclusive, that might make it special. But on the other hand, I never want to lock people out from enjoying something.
Okay.
So I can see, like, I could print these on demand if I needed to. So in the future, yeah, I could definitely offer these as posters.
Okay. But at least for the time being, this is a great way to get like these bonus illustrations from the history of the comic.
I would say so, yes.
You've also been interested in colorizing your work recently. Is that just going to be like some of your like greatest hits strips?
That's a hard one. I was having this interaction with Reddit a couple of months ago, and it seems that they responded to color really well, and they didn't like black and white, which was unfortunate for me because I adore black and white, and it's also cheap to print. But it seemed that I had to make this transition or I was going to go out of business. So I had to colorize or make all my work color from now on. And so it seems that because I was going to change over, it was Bite Size, now Probl-O-Matic, into a colored strip, the reason that I collected everything into this one volume is that all the black and white stuff will be in this volume. And then all the comics from now on, theoretically, would be in color.
So I've read up to like episode 441. So I haven't gotten to like the transition to color yet. Okay. Tell us a little bit about, you know, the work it took to transition to color, and tell us the story about how it became the title change to Probl-O-Matic.
Good question. I changed it to color because it seems that it's more clickable. When people see a colored strip, like if you go to my Twitter right now, gprime85, you can look and just scroll down my wall, right? And it's just all this black and white work, and it's kind of hard to differentiate one strip from another. So I guess at a glance, color is good at catching the eye to say, oh, this is a different strip from what I just read. So I guess if you look at it with marketing glasses, color is the way to go because that's what, at a glance, people seem to want. So it's kind of bittersweet. I don't want to go to color, but at the same time, I see the value in it. Mm-hmm. And the title Probl-O-Matic was representative of a shift in the storyline where I almost changed the main character from Greg to Xavier's younger sister, Astrid. I almost made a spin-off series with her as the main character because I thought it was so good to have a main character that was a young woman, because I really want young women to read comics. Just as a demographic, I just think they're untapped in America. Nobody makes books for them. So I wanted to make a strip just for them. And I said, because it's in the same universe, why not just marry them and make Astrid one of the main characters and just call the whole series Probl-O-Matic? Because that's what I called her series. Because she's in high school with all the current political climate things happening to her. And I thought, because she's going to be considered problematic because of her mild views, which I say they're mild. I thought that name was really funny. Problematic, like automatic.
Yeah.
So I just called the whole series that. I think it fits. It's better than Bite Size. It's not as generic as Bite Size because everything's Bite Size.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny how you say it too, because it just sounds like the word problematic, but then it kind of connotes like this robotic idea. Yeah, I like the title. It sticks in the head.
Yeah, it's a little more unique than it was before.
You mentioned on your Indiegogo that you might have enough scripts to do years worth of these comics. Yeah. So do you see Indiegogo and like other, I don't know, like Patreon or independent publishing platforms as a viable option for an artist to build an audience and do the work of funding their creative work?
100%. I think that is the future. Like, especially for comic strips, let's say, back in the day, I don't know how many people were, young enough to remember this, but we had the funny pages in the newspaper. So when I talk about Charlie Brown and Calvin and Hobbes, you get the newspaper in the mail every day, whatever. You go to the funny pages, you read your comics for free. And the way that business model worked is they were called syndicates. And the comics artists like Bill Watterson and Charles Schultz would have a sort of 50-50 deal with merchandising, actually. Mm-hmm. And also selling the strip or licensing the strip to these newspapers. The newspaper, pay you $100 a day to have your strip in my newspaper. And then you would split that money with your syndicate. And your syndicate was basically just a salesman to say, hey, this strip is funny, put it in your newspaper.
Right.
And then they would try to sell merch. And that's actually why Calvin and Hobbes got canceled. But that's another story. But now there are no newspapers that have funnies. Like it's webtoons now. So now there has to be a sort of new relationship between readers and the creators, where maybe there's some sort of like a little tip jar kind of thing going on. So I love the idea of Patreon, and I know Patreon has had problems recently, so I'm looking for alternatives. But I think the idea of Patreon is really important. If you love a comic strip, it's really important for the creator to have a way for you to give them just $1 a month or something. Like, let's say I had 1,000 readers, 2,000 readers on the internet. That's not impossible, right? And if they each gave you $1 a month, you would be able to make comics full time. And I think something like that needs to happen. It needs to be more normalized. Like right now, it's kind of a big ask to ask someone to support you monthly. But maybe in the future it won't be. Or buying books, like on the Indiegogo. We see what happened with Ethan Van Sciver and stuff. You can support your creators directly without all the middlemen. All the middlemen were necessary back, let's say 20, 30, 50 years ago. You needed retailers, you needed publishers, you needed distributors. But now you can just mail books to people for $3.
Right.
So it's gradually changing. I think there has to be more normalization of the idea of a tip jar.
Yeah. Do you think that that the blessing of the internet is also maybe like a doom for the local comic book shop? Because for you and Greg, like the Barnes and Noble manga section in Coffee was like your chance to read all this stuff. For me, it was probably the library. I think it's important for there to be places where, like big physical collections of these things exist. Because even though like digital devices are going to become, they already are, it's just a normal part of everyday life. I feel like it is important to have like an object you can hold in your hands and trade with someone. Like I can't hand someone my iPad and say, hey, check out this comic.
Yeah.
Do you see a way of that evolving or maybe surviving the digital revolution?
That's such a good question. I mean, we probably both grew up like in the same settings. Like I love libraries, and I love that they, at least in my area, they have tons of manga. So that was a great way to be exposed to manga that I never would have been exposed to. Geez, nowadays, I would love to have my stuff on a bookshelf at a comic shop.
Yeah.
But I think like I have a local comic shop that actually does stock my stuff. I go in there and I give them a stack of books and they say, okay, well, we're going to take 35% of whatever we can sell. and that's actually obscenely high. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, that makes sense though, because it's so, small quantities and everything.
Right.
But that would make my profit margin so low that it's almost like I'm just giving them away, which is okay.
Yeah.
But in order to make a living at this, there has to be some kind of symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, I think artists want the kind of like the good feeling that comes of having your work appear in a comic book shop, but is it profitable? And I don't think like the politics stuff in comics over the past year helps any.
Yeah, it's really sloppy. I have so much to say about that. But really, at the end of the day, you got the people that love books, love comics, and they need it to succeed as a medium. Even just as amateur storytelling, it needs to exist. Fan fiction can be the same thing, whatever. But comics are really important.
Yeah.
And in order to do it, though, to find the time to produce it, especially draw it, you need to have 20 hours a week at least.
Mm-hmm.
And if you got a full-time job, and if you get older and you get married and you have kids, you're just not going to have time to do it. Like I drew a lot of Probl-O-Matic when I was in my 20s and single, and that's a lot of the subject matter, of course. But I had the time back then. But now I'm getting older, and it's like I need to find a way to monetize this. And I don't mean in a greedy way, but I need to be able to make a living off this,
right.
Or I can't find the time to draw comics anymore.
It's just practical. Food comes first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there has to be a way that we can convince the readers and not do this drama stuff. I don't like the drama stuff, but I understand why it's happening. But like, guys, readers, I'm not talking to the people listening, but it's like, please just support your favorite artists. Send them $1. Help them make a living at this so they can focus on it and not do stuff on the side. A lot of my comics, since the last time I worked on a book full time, I had a book with Tokyo Pop, if you've heard of them.
Yeah.
My first book was published by them in 2005, 2006. And then there was the giant crash where they went out of business.
Yeah.
And I was able to do it for like 2 years full time. But then I had to get other jobs, other primary jobs, full-time jobs. And I had all these scripts. They're just sitting there. It's like, I wish I've so many times I'm like, oh, I wish I was Japanese, but it's like, no, we can change the American climate as well.
Right.
We just have to change the way comics are viewed. It can't be this drama queen stuff. It has to be a viable medium that's respected.
Nobody buys a entertaining thing because they want to get inducted into a culture war. No. I do not diminish the importance of the culture war for anything that's going on, but people want a story or they want something entertaining for themselves, for their own amusement, for their own enlightenment. They want to get something positive out of the experience.
Yes. It's books can mean so many things to so many people. Like you hear the story of a guy who's in the hospital or something, or I'm going through a really hard year and your comics have really lifted, my spirits or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, it can mean a lot to a person. Like I always say, like, comics or art in general or books is not like a necessary life and death thing. That it's not a service that you can provide that'll keep someone alive, but it's kind of like visiting a doctor, or like for the soul or something. Like being able to read a book and just spend time in a book for a little while can mean so much to someone. Yeah. It's like a little mini vacation.
Well, I don't remember what number it is, but I think Greg is talking to 2 of his nephews and they've got like cardboard swords and stuff. And he says, well, you don't need like a whole bunch of armor to go out there and have an adventure. And one of the kids says, well, what if we meet a fire-breathing dragon? He says, okay, that's a good point. And that's the gag, but there's also this undercurrent to it of young kids wanting an adventure and like older people kind of recognizing the value of young kids wanting that adventure because it relates to everything else in life. Well, that's just the Jordan Peterson line, right? Slay the dragon, clean your room, stop the chaos. You apply, you carry these stories with you for the rest of your life, and you think about them when you're having what seem to be mundane problems that are kind of like tragically affecting you.
It is escapism, but it gives you a compass for life. Like, if I don't mean to downplay it or make it sound like it's too important, but like, stories are how, historically speaking, you pass morals on from one generation to another. And the older the story, that, like, let's say the story has not changed in 1,000 years, 2,000 years, that means that story has 2,000 years of wisdom in it that has survived that long. Maybe there's something in it that you need to know, and it's worth studying.
It sounds like it sounds like your Christianity hasn't entirely left you.
No,
or at least the impact hasn't.
I would love to talk about that in some real depth sometime. No, I was training to become a preacher, actually.
Interesting.
The only reason that I say I'm agnostic now is there was a sort of, I don't know how to explain it, but I needed, what did I say? I put my faith on hold pending revelation. But like all the values and all that stuff, like I still live as if I am very much a follower, you know?
Gosh.
All the morals, everything are very important to me. I still keep them. But for some reason, I'm in that place in my life where I wish I could just like have one of those wild dreams and be like, wow, I have my purpose in life. But usually you get killed after that. So maybe I should be happy.
Well, and yet you're a person who is producing tons of work. You've produced a ton of work, and a lot of it is thoughtful. So you're saying you're waiting for revelation to find your purpose in life. Yeah. There are very few artists who I encounter who show that kind of thing. Like they have the big dream, right? Like they have the big dream, but they don't have like they don't have like the portfolio of work to show that they've been going for that dream. I think there's something to say for that.
Well, I've never closed the door, and man, who knows? Like, who knows how long I'll live or what kind of adventures we'll get into. But I think this culture war is touching on something where some people seem, if I was in the mood to talk about like supernatural stuff, it seems people are coming forth as if they're being selected to take part in this amazing battle of
ideas.
For the soul of, culture itself. All these people seem to be fighting it's all verbal right now. People aren't like lobbing grenades at each other, but maybe instead of grenades, we're lobbing ideas at each other. And maybe we're just seeing that it's a new kind of battle. The internet never existed back then. So
yeah,
now all these people have their opinions out there.
It's replaced the academy. The dream of the academy was it would be this marketplace of ideas, and you would be challenged by exposure to all these ideas. And my personal experience with the academy is that was a joke. And the internet has become what that dream used to be. Yeah.
Yeah. You got your students, your peers around you. You got the masters of the crafts or the knowledge that you're trying to acquire. Why not? The internet's like that. You can find any knowledge out there. You just type it in. Yeah. Find your champion, find the person you want to emulate, and find your peers.
Well, it's like that. It's like that meme. It's the guy, he's standing next to a girl, and the girl is labeled like millions of terabytes of amazing information. And instead he's looking at the other girl, and she's labeled dumb idiots who make me mad.
Yeah. Yeah. What can you say? The internet is as if humanity is being recorded in front of our very eyes. I don't know. It's the biggest deal in the world. It's the biggest thing since the printing press. We're watching it. Like, I was born before the internet was a thing, so I'm watching it in real time become life itself.
Yeah.
But it just as a proxy, like it is the thing that stands in for, if you took all our brains and melted it into a soup, that's the internet. It's amazing to see and horrifying.
Thomas DeVries asks, have you ever considered mixing your media as a means of promotion? I'm not 100% sure what Thomas meant by that, but George actually talked about, using script writing, using YouTube. So you have done some of that. You have been like cross promoting your work. Yeah. Are there other like fields that you use? I don't know, like Blogger or something.
I used to try to blog and stuff, but I spread myself too thin between too many websites.
Yeah.
So between my own actual website, if they mean mediums, I would say I could use something like YouTube to say, let's say I could read my stories out loud as if they were audiobooks.
Yeah.
Or put up illustrations. I could even animate and have friends do voice acting. The only thing stopping me again is time.
Yeah.
And if, let's say if I had enough readers and they all said, oh, please make a, oh, he clarified. What I mean to say is expand your character's ideas for music video. Yeah. I mean, I know some musicians that I've had bookmarked for a long time.
Hmm.
I know coders. I've made video games. That's actually my full-time job before all this happened. So a lot of my scripts that were going to be graphic novels, I wanted to make those into video games, actually.
Yeah.
I thought games, like if you play RPGs.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, so those stories are graphic novels, basically. And they have the advantage of having a choose-your-own-adventure element as well, like, say, The Witcher, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You can choose the outcomes of the stories, which makes them your stories. That makes them even better. So I have a couple of scripts that were meant to be RPG scripts that I can still turn into an RPG, but I have to find a coder that I trust who can publish them. Like, I've never published a game myself, but I could see them being smartphone games as RPGs. Absolutely.
But maybe since you're speaking to like the problem of like time commitments, I very much have that where I still actively draw. Like I was a academic portrait artist, right? So kind of like every little whisker on the face and every little subtle shadow of it. But then I've never completed like a finished published comic project except from like small little comic projects for friends. Okay. So I've always had this kind of like struggle of balancing like career and this artistic project and that artistic project, and then the YouTube channel kind of like, it just sort of surprised me how much feedback and of a following I got here. And it really kind of like brought me back into the art world again. If I were you, if you're looking for like a time, what would be the word? Time sensitive, time considerate way of doing that, I would like to hear you read your own comics because you have a good voice for it. And that would be a way of like, I think that kids like a video. They like having a video put in front of them. They don't like to sit down and read it. They like to have someone read it to them. Because that's what I've noticed most of the animators did. Like when the second wave of YouTube animators were people who were kind of lightly animating their own life experiences and stories, which is it's just a comic strip in the form of a YouTube video. And yeah, so maybe the word for it is I'm going to try to treat my social media as a way to like advertise my interest in the culture and advertise myself as an artist, but I don't think I'm ever going to be like a Logan Paul, like PewDiePie, top of the social media meme world thing. But I think you can use it to supplement what you're doing as an artist. I certainly would be interested in hearing your voice renditions of your own characters.
I'll have to figure it out because if I'm reading the 4-panel strips, those videos would probably be very short.
They would be, but then let's you make like a lot of brief videos. I call it like give yourself short projects while also having like the bigger projects you're pursuing, and you have been doing that for years.
Yeah, I mean, I love audiobooks, for instance, and I listen to a lot of content on YouTube, just audio.
Yeah.
So I can see that being a thing. Absolutely.
Okay, have you found a Comic Storian?
Comic Storian
on YouTube. He's like a 1 million sub comic channel. He's a little controversial because it's not clear whether he has permission to do what he does, but he does like audiobooks of mainstream Marvel and DC comics, and I guess he must have some sort of like legal deal with them to be able to do it. But he pretty much gets a following of kids who are interested in hearing an Iron Man story, but the parents won't take them to the comic book shop and pay $5 for a bunch of Iron Man comic books, right? So I think there is a market for people to listen. Well, even there are ripoff channels that like would just steal a whole bunch of comics and dub them, and I think that's very unethical. So I'd almost kind of like encourage, if rather than have some YouTuber rip off your work, maybe you should try doing. Maybe comic artists should consider doing that themselves as like a, I don't know, side strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't hurt. Like, it doesn't take money out of your pocket. It's just one more way that people can enjoy your stuff. I have to look into it. The biggest thing that I'm trying to do with YouTube now is try to make videos that are also really easy to publish. Like, I have that thing with, I'm sure you talked about if you were doing fine art, especially portraits, like getting into every last little detail with the whiskers and everything.
Yeah.
I do the same thing with editing as well. Like I micromanage everything. What I would love to do is just take a voice track that's a certain number of minutes long, and then just post up some art and export it quickly. And it'll take me 2 hours to make the video. Right now, it takes me a day. I don't like that.
Thomas DeVry says you can Ken Burns your strips as a start. That's almost exactly what you're describing.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to look into that.
Cool beans. Well, I forgot to link your YouTube channel. I'll have to look that up. All right. I want to bring this back to Probl-O-Matic again. What could we expect in the future for Probl-O-Matic? You don't have to spoil any like amazing secrets, but maybe sell us on what the future of the Probl-O-Matic story and these characters will be.
Okay. The strip right now is at about 550 strips, or the series. And I have about double that written. So a lot of the scripts have already been, they're sitting in a binder, they're ready to go. I just have to actually draw them. For each character, they're going to have different things going on in their lives. So if anyone's read it, for instance, Greg, his whole thing so far is he's been looking for a girlfriend. What happens if he gets a girlfriend?
Yeah.
That's a very important question. That's an aspect of his character we haven't seen yet, because he's been pining for one for 10 years. So I'm going to give him what he's wanted, and maybe it's not what he thinks it's going to be. Xavier's got a mother hen thing going on with her sister. I want to develop her family story, because a lot of things about their family hasn't been touched upon. Like, for instance, their mother is not in the picture. Why? What happened to her? I want to talk about that, and maybe I can explain why Xavier is the way that she is. Duncan and Francine, as a married couple, have a lot of development to go through together. Especially, I want to explore Duncan's family, and like a part of their dynamic is a lot of my younger readers on Webtoon are saying, why do you hate women so much? Because I write Francine as this very neurotic, she's the married woman in the series, right? So she has this certain character, this certain personality that mistakenly people thought that's supposed to represent all women. It doesn't.
Yeah.
But why is she like that? Why did Duncan end up with her? I want to explore these things and shine more light on why they are the way that they are. And I don't have an ending planned, but that's sort of by design. I just kind of want to let the series go on for as long as it should.
Any additional comic I mean, you've mentioned that you have like all of these scripts and stuff. Do you have like a project that you might do in comics or graphic novel form along with Probl-O-Matic?
Yeah, earlier we talked about this. Oh, sorry, I missed you.
My last question, like, what would be like your next big comic project apart from Probl-O-Matic or after Probl-O-Matic?
Yeah, that's a tough one. The easiest route would be to take the scripts that are already finished and convert them. Like right now, they're sort of written like screenplays, if anyone's read a screenplay. So there's a couple of stage directions, like the character walks across the street and waves at his friend. And then it's just tons of dialogue. So I could take those scripts, polish them up a little bit so they make more sense to read, and then maybe pepper some illustrations. And I think I might publish those as books or ebooks, just to get them out there, even if I never have time to turn them into proper books.
Yeah.
I want the stories to be out there because they're finished, and it's killing me that they're just sitting here on my hard drive. One of those is called Acorn Quest, or the Piggyback Acorn,
right?
Which was supposed to be the RPG that I worked on a couple of years ago, which the script is almost finished. There's a lot of illustrations to do, but I've always wanted to turn that into a sort of fairy tale book. So I might do that next. It depends if this Probl-O-Matic thing goes well and how much time I have after that. Because the big question for me this year is, what am I going to do professionally just to make ends meet?
Right.
If I can do this full time, then I will continue Probl-O-Matic and publish my scripts. And then if I get super popular, maybe I'll turn them into comics.
Yeah.
And graphic novels. I don't know if I'll have time.
So that's the important thing to emphasize about Indiegogo is, it's funding an immediate project. but it's also helping you gauge what your following is and how much support you've got for your other comic work. Yeah. And I've noticed a lot of people, you know, they'll do one Indiegogo, and then next year they'll follow up with, I think it's the people who do like Lady Death or whatever it is. They just will keep doing an Indiegogo, and they get like $250,000 per, you know, new volume of Lady Death Adventures or whatever it is. Like this can be a good opportunity for you to like deliver on a good product for you know, an audience that doesn't just enjoy reading your work, but is also willing to pay for your work. And then every time you deliver a decent product, you know, that's on someone's bookshelf, and they remember that the next time you've got to fund like the next creative project. So I just really want to encourage people to check out your Indiegogo, share the page, look at the different tiers. I think these are work that I'm just so glad Indiegogo exists so I can support artists like you.
Yeah, we're still working out the kinks, I think, just as a profession. 10 years ago, it was just like, if anyone's read Penny Arcade, they had their own merchandise, they printed their own books. But now with Patreon and stuff and Indiegogo, there is a way for creators and the audience to just directly be in touch. I have this book. Do you want to buy this book?
Yeah.
Before Indiegogo, I just had the books and would link to like my Etsy store, and you can buy them off that.
Yeah.
But this is just one more way for me to have that one-on-one with my audience. Can I have my book on your shelf? Is it worthy? And that's a great honor. And I would love, yeah, if anyone wants to look at the archive, it's up on my website. You can read the whole thing for free. Decide if you want to read it. And if you buy the book, that's just one way that you can support more comics.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
We've been going for about an hour. That's about usually what I do with artists who are talking about their books. Anything you want? Anything you want to have one of those religious or Miyazaki debates while we're at it?
100%. If people want to hear it, let's do it.
All right. Let me think. I started getting into Miyazaki in college. I think I watched Kiki's Delivery Service as a kid, but I didn't like sit down and say I'm going to watch this guy's movies until like we had like the college anime group. And I found a few. I haven't learned any of their names yet. Like I know that like I know there are a lot of great directors besides Miyazaki in Japan. He's like the only one whose name I've like memorized so far.
Okay. Well, when we were growing up, there was Ghost in the Shell, Akira.
Yeah.
The big ones. Let's see, Evangelion was big, but that was weird.
Right. I got from the library and I watched the English dub and I just thought this is weird. And then
it was a very weird series. Yeah. I used to skip school to go to the mall to buy the VHSs. That was 2 episodes per VHS, and it was $25.
Gosh.
I wasted so much money on that series.
Yeah.
I was 14 though. I thought that was gospel back then.
Right. Yeah. it was huge. It was weird.
Yeah.
Let's
see.
All right, let's pick a I don't know, let's pick a Pixar movie or a Miyazaki movie to debate. Do you have any Studio Ghibli movies you hate?
Anything that no, that's not true. I was going to say anything that Miyazaki didn't do, but Isao Takahata is really good.
Yeah, they do have a lot of good talent. I don't know. I didn't like what is it? Tales of Earthsea.
That was Goro Miyazaki, his son.
His son. Because I loved it the first time I watched it, and then I watched it a second time, and I didn't like it. Have you seen that one?
I refuse to watch it.
All right, because of the bad reviews, or just because it's?
No.
Have you heard enough guys say I don't want to see it?
I know that Goro is his son, and he was going to try to inherit the company. But then I saw an interview in a movie called Kingdom of Dreams and Madness, I think. That was a documentary about Studio Ghibli, where Goro, his son, was saying, like, I never wanted to be a director, and he's acting like it was forced on him. And I was I wanted to choke him. Like, you understand, like, I would kill a man to be in your position. I would kill. And you don't even want to be a director at Studio Ghibli.
The visual direction of it is phenomenal. The visual direction of it made me think this is his father's son. It's just a bad adaptation, I think, of a story, because all the Ghibli films take the source material and they take them in kind of like their weird, unique direction. I think they just sort of like lost the thread of what the story should have been about, and they kind of like got down too many, I call them side avenues. Like, we know what the story's supposed to be about, and now you've abandoned that to go chase this rabbit or something. But visually, it's phenomenal. And I actually, did Goro do Arrietty? Does that ring a bell?
I don't think he directed it.
Okay.
I know Hayao Miyazaki wrote it.
Okay.
He didn't direct it.
All right.
I didn't like Arrietty so much.
Really?
It was okay.
I liked Arrietty. Maybe I read the Borrower's book when I was a little kid. So the weird thing about Arrietty is the book is all about her family, and the movie is all about how lonely she is. So I think I clicked with it as like that, classic young girl, rising up. So what didn't click with you for Tale of Arrietty?
I bet there was just no nostalgia for me. I never read the books as a kid, but I just thought maybe I idolize him too much as a director. I think it was missing something. I couldn't put my finger on it. It didn't have that magic. Like, if I think about my favorite movies of his, which is basically everything, he does things that other directors wouldn't think to do. And if you listen to his interviews, like, for instance, in Spirited Away, Sen would be walking down some stairs. She's putting on her shoes, and then she stops to tap her toe to make sure that the shoe is on even better.
Yeah.
What animator would even waste his time doing that? But he does that.
Yeah.
And I think his movies are filthy with details like that.
Yeah.
That I think other movies, I don't know about Arrietty. I only saw it the once. I didn't even like Ponyo at first, but I love it now.
I think that Spirited Away, like, I've got a whole like rough draft of a script for how the little things Sen does throughout the movie make the character, and 90% of them are nonverbal ways of developing your character. It's all like expression and body language. Yeah,
because he also was a manga artist. I think manga, specifically Japanese comics, was rooted in what we now call cinema, like actual cinema.
Yeah.
Which I think has been lost in American movies, where they're trying to communicate visually, like, character traits that, like, what can you tell just by cocking your head a certain way, or even a pregnant silence. A lot of movies don't take time to do that anymore. And so, because I think he's older and grew up with manga and cinema, Miyazaki knows that stuff is really important, especially like just the cinematic language, nonverbal communication, a look between two characters can mean so much.
And you're a you're a Akira Kurosawa fan too, right?
Oh, forget it.
Yeah.
I love him.
Well, okay, so pretty much we should just like go ahead and just like make a podcast so we can geek out about these movies or something.
100%. I've been wanting, I don't meet a lot of people that like, let's do it. I say yes. We can go through all their movies one by one, but like, I love that. I talk about like how much I love Japanese stuff and all that stuff, but like not in the pop culture way. I love that they are excellent culturally. They're amazing refiners. They take something that like maybe cinema was invented in other countries, but they do things with it. They perfected animation. They perfected cinema. There's Yasujiro Ozu, late spring, early summer. He made Tokyo Story. He was a contemporary of Kurosawa. He made very sentimental movies, but there was these black and white Japanese movies that are so touching, and they will like soul crushingly sad and moving and beautiful. And films, that's why I act like a film snob nowadays. Like, I just don't think nowadays they make movies that even touch the classics, the black and white classics.
Do you know Andrew Clavin?
Andrew Clavin. I know that name.
He's part of like the Daily Wire podcast along with Ben Shapiro. So he's got this theory that I buy. His theory is that as an art form is dying, it separates into the intellectual snobby stuff that nobody watches and the dumb popular stuff that people buy, but it's not that intellectual. And his theory is that in the early days of cinema, these were the same thing. The great movies, Wizard of Oz, Ben-Hur. These were popular movies that the general public loved, and these were also movies that spoke to like the intellectual elite class. And that now that the movie art form is kind of dying, it's separated into I love superheroes, but dumb superhero movie after dumb superhero movie, and really avant-garde weird stuff that Hollywood likes, but no one's ever heard of.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg thing, but it seems culturally the masses seem to just prefer kind of popcorn entertainment. Like if I talk about Kurosawa, you know, somebody might roll their eyes at me. Like not in a snobby way, but like, okay, here's more of that black and white stuff. I get it.
Well, I take Kurosawa. Like Seven Samurai is an action adventure story, but it's an action adventure story with a lot of depth to it.
So much. Yeah. You know what's funny about that one? Not to interrupt you. I'm so sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead. You're the guest.
No. I bought it as a young man back in the days when I was watching a lot of anime. Like, oh, cool, a samurai movie. And I was like 16 or 15. And I bought it. I watched it on DVD. I bought it for $40. And I'm like watching it for 3 hours. I'm like, this is really boring. And I was younger. But then as I got older, I couldn't stop thinking about the movie. And then I saw it again in my early 20s. I'm like, oh my, this is a masterpiece.
Yeah.
I guess it was an expectations thing. I wanted an action samurai movie, but it was so much more than that. I think we just got to have more content like that where people can taste the kind of depths that cinema can really hit. Maybe give them a little action, fine. But storytelling, what was it? Darn it. I had something and I lost it.
That's all right. I think I'm catching your drift. Yeah, well, it's returning to what we were talking about earlier. The more you feed your imagination, one of my teachers used to call it story soup. You know, across thousands of years, everyone would keep adding to this story soup, and then they take the recipe out, and then they add that to their own recipe and make their own story soup. But then their ingredients go into the soup of story, and it just keeps getting percolating across the centuries and millennia.
And the best stories that survive are the ones that communicate through time and place.
Yep.
Maybe that's something that's being lost right now. Like the stories that are being made, like Marvel and DC and all that stuff, they're very much for people living in America right now, but they will not survive 10 years, 20 years, 100 years from now. But Casablanca is almost 100 years old, and it is a masterpiece. It still touches people. Or
until they make Casablanca 2 and Casablanca 3, The Revengeing.
Yeah, exactly. They don't get. There was even this movie. My wife was laughing at me. This movie, black and white movie called The Little Shop Around the Corner, or something like that. It's this little romance movie, black and white. And at the end, it's just basically You've Got Mail with Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks, but it was the original. And when you see at the end that the lady didn't know it was really him that she was in love with and whatever, I cried at the end in front of her on the couch. And she's like, you're so soft. And like, who cries at the end of a black and white movie? But it's like, that movie is almost 100 years old and it still is so perfectly, like, I get it. It touches me. It's real. I don't think a lot of the entertainment now is being made for artistic reasons. It's just made to make a buck, consumed, move on to the next one, which is fine. You need your cash cows, but there also, I think there needs to be art as well. And art has to be something, real art has to be something that goes cross-cultural and across time. And it needs maybe dozens of years to really be proven as enduring.
I call them butts and seats movies or butts and seats books. Like Disney comics, I've gained a new respect for them because they are just so consistently entertaining. And not all of them have like these big, deep moral thoughts to them. But then occasionally you get like this really educational one or this really, beautiful, heroic one that speaks to you. And so I think the value of that is they consistently would deliver fun Donald Duck stories. And then maybe 1 out of 10 Donald Duck stories would be this really mature, meaningful thing that kind of rises above just like the common kids entertainment cliches. Yeah. So I think that maybe it's not that we don't have that. Maybe it's just that in kind of like the craziness of Twitter and YouTube, maybe that gets a little bit drowned out by, like the drama alert videos and stuff. But I think it's still there. We just have to like find it, and then once we find it, like let people know, hey, this thing exists. Check it out.
Yeah, gems like for instance, Batman. I was just at Home Depot or Lowe's today, and they had Batman watering cans for your plants.
Nice.
And I was like, okay, this is dumb. What happened to the Dark Knight Batman? And it hit me, of course. By default, Batman is the watering can. And by some miracle, we get Dark Knight once every 50 years.
Yeah.
So I can totally buy into that. We get a lot of silly Star Wars movies, and sometimes you get an Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
But for me, for what it's worth, I want to make the Empire Strikes Back, not The Last Jedi.
You have to read a lot to find the gems, and that,
Yeah.
and sometimes like, what am I looking for? Sometimes you can like overhype the really good thing. Like my friends who didn't watch Star Wars as a kid, everybody's been telling them all their lives, watch Star Wars, and they watch Star Wars and say that's okay, and I don't know. It speaks to you as a kid, but then can you come back to it as an adult? And I think maybe that's what you're getting at. So the power of The Empire Strikes Back is that it's a great film. You can see what a great film it is, looking at it like with your film critic glasses on, tearing down scene by scene. But then the other side of entertainment is just sitting down and absorbing it. Maybe not passively, but just kind of like being absorbed into the world of the story and not thinking about every little, I don't know, like English class term for everything.
I've always felt like the best movies and books and everything get better with reconsumption.
Because then you appreciate it.
Yeah, even as you get older, you can see new dimensions that weren't there before, or on new passes. Like, let's say a movie with a twist at the end, you can rewatch it immediately with a new context, and it's even richer. I think the best stories, even like if something's spoiled ahead of time, like maybe if you already know the story, that's not a bad thing because you can still appreciate certain depths. I don't know. It's a theory. Like maybe spoilers aren't a bad thing. Maybe the best stories, maybe the best stories get better with retelling. I don't know.
Well, gee, you saw it live on this YouTube channel. Georgia #1 Marmaduke fan. We found a kindred spirit on the internet. Let's definitely meet up again in the future. Maybe we can talk some Japanese films, to all kinds of stuff. There's just so much great comic book history we could talk about. All right, so the link for the Indiegogo for Probl-O-Matic is in the description. George, I'm going to have to be heading soon, so I want to give you the last word for everyone.
Sure. You know what? I'm going to say that this has been one of my favorite interviews ever, my whole career. I know that it's, anyway, it doesn't matter. I think you're awesome. I love that I was able to talk about my stuff in such depth, and I hope that everyone listening sees my stuff. Go to my Twitter if you want, gprime85. Just read as much as you want, and if you want to support more, tell your friends about my stuff. Share my stuff around if you want, and if you feel moved to, I'd love to take your money. But not in like a greedy way, but like in a survival way. If I can do this full time, then I can make even more comics, and maybe, if you like my stuff, you can get more of it. The more time I can spend, the more I can make. So,
well, I'm a backer of your Indiegogo project. I think everyone listening should become one too. And just want to let you know your words. I'm like I'm starting to tear up like Greg watching Gilmore Girls in your comic, hearing that. So thank you.
Get out of here.
All right. I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. You've been a great guest. Thank you, everybody. And Greg, you have an open invite to shill your work and make money with future comic projects, writing projects, whatever. You have an open invite to come back on this channel and chat about me with it.
I will be honored anytime.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll catch you later. Right. Bye-bye.
You had fun.